Yes, boys and girls, the insanity has returned. Hello everybody and welcome! Last time on this channel we talked about the new vehicle editor that was implemented into Kitten's space agency. And there was a great suggestion in one of the comments below the video to test how the performance of this editor actually is with bigger builds and more parts. And if you know this channel and have followed me for the past, well, more than 10 years now actually, you know that I like to build big in these space simulation games like Kerbal Space Program, etc. So I did exactly that. I started to build a rocket and then incrementally increased the part size to see where the limits were. And I already started working on this video because I came to a certain conclusion, and then the developers dropped a new update and it literally changed everything. Well, not everything in the sense that the game is now maybe a first-person shooter instead of a space simulation game. No, it changed all of the performance things I would have criticized earlier, and there's still something to criticize of course, but everything was better after this update. So let me explain how that went about. And if you want to stay in the loop regarding the development of KSA or other space simulation games, make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you won't miss an update. Okay, I started out basically using the rocket vehicle that's available in KSA as a template and built a 3-stage version of it. Together with the third stage, this had about 100 parts, I think 105 or 107 to be exact. So that was a good benchmark. Those tank stacks with the engines on the bottom that you can see on the outside of the third stage, each of these stacks is 10 parts. So 5 tanks, 1 engine plate and 4 engines, which makes 10. So I used 8 by symmetry to add more, and then add more and add more to get to higher and higher part counts. And as I said in the beginning with the initial build for the vehicle editor, this was very tedious because the more parts I added to this, the slower everything went, especially when trying to place a copied segment. That's also why all the parts were kind of anywhere, not really aligned on top with each other, because it took ages to react to my mouse movements. Finally! And there was not just one time when I thought I had crashed the game. But with the latest update to the vehicle editor and the game in general, this changed significantly. While there is still a measurable performance drop when you copy parts and edit them once you reach like more than 1,000 parts or something like that, it is a lot better and a lot faster than before, and it doesn't come to a halt that you think the game has crashed. There are also a lot of other improvements. As I mentioned already, there was this faster attachment performance and much more improved stability and precision when you add parts to an already existing vehicle. They improved how you rotate parts by pressing W, A, S, D, Q, and E. You can now hold Shift to incrementally rotate them by 5 degrees, something we already had in Kerbal Space Program, of course. On the top right, there are now new buttons and a gizmo. There's now an orthogonal view versus the usual perspective view, and this X, Y, and Z gizmo shows you where the camera position actually is, and if you click on either of the X's, Y's, or Z's, the camera will snap to that axis, which is very useful once you use the orthogonal view to like really precision place stuff. This is one of the things, by the way, that Kerbal Space Program 2 did right when they improved stuff for the VAB editor in the sequel to KSP. Another very useful thing is that we now have a delta V and thrust to weight ratio readout within the editor. It is sort of called a debug feature, but I think something like this should be standard inside the game, or at least something you can unlock during the game progression once we have an actual game at hand. There are also performance improvements to flying the vehicle compared to the previous version, but I'll get to those later. First, let's talk about how you actually should build a vehicle, or how I go about building a vehicle in KSA, because it's a little bit weird at the moment. When you start up the game, you either end up in orbit or at a launch site that you have chosen at the beginning. And if you go to the menu and say build new vehicle and then build your vehicle, you cannot save it. It requires you to have an existing vehicle within the game world to actually be able to save it. So you build your new vehicle, then you have to launch it or exit the editor, then re-enter the editor through the debug menu because the keyboard shortcut Shift+E was removed for some reason, and then you're allowed to save your vehicle. Here's how I do it usually. I have a save game right after launching the game, which I just called Start. This is sort of my revert point when something goes wrong or when I just want to have a clean slate without relaunching the entire software. Then I enter the editor with the current vehicle. I remove everything except for the capsule and then build from there. I mean, I could make things easier for me by just removing everything except the capsule, then exit the editor and then save that as sort of my build revert point. But why make things easy? Once you do that, so once you have an existing vehicle inside the editor, you can also load previous vehicles, which kind of just float there. And what I usually do is I just detach everything below the capsule and above the capsule and put it to the other capsule. There's probably an easier method to do this, or I'm sure there will be an easier method to do this, but this is how I do it at the moment. And once you modify your vehicle or build basically a new one around the existing capsule, you can save that as a new vehicle. And then you can either fly around or reload the revert point you created earlier and then select Launch Existing Vehicle from the menu to launch the vehicle you just built. Alright, let's talk about the actual performance while flying these vehicles with increasing part counts. I started out with the 105 parts vehicle and that went just fine in the previous version and also in the current one. Frames per second did drop as soon as I activated the engine of the first stage, but there's a lot going on with fuel flow and the graphic goodness of all those wonderful plumes that are going on, etc. So once you stage to your second stage or your third stage, the frames per second of course improve, but it never dropped below anything that's not useful. I'm running the game in 1440p with every graphics detail maxed, by the way. I then of course increased the part count and launched bigger and bigger vehicles, and with the previous version everything came to a halt when I wanted to do the 500 part vehicle. Either it would refuse to launch when trying to launch it from the editor or load it in general or then stage it or anything, so it was a bit of a disappointment in that regard. But with the current version, this worked fine. I could launch it from the editor, I could load it directly onto the launch site, and I could fly it without any problem. This one here has even more parts, it has like 665, and once we have it on sort of the launch pad, this should be Launch Complex 39A, we have 50 to 60 FPS. And once we launch, we are dropped down to about 20 FPS, as you can see here. But everything is still usable, everything works out fine for the time being. The only problem is once you reach time to stage and hit the spacebar to activate the next stage, things come to a bit of a crawl. With 600 parts, it took me about almost a minute to get from pressing spacebar to the actual second stage firing, and this only increased as soon as I increased part count. So I did a 745 part version, I did an 820 part version, I did a 900 part version, etc. And every time I increased the parts, the staging would get slower and slower and slower, until I had that 1065 part vehicle. And with that, staging took 5 minutes. So yeah, there's room to improve over there. Also, yeah, frames per second dropped down significantly when we launched that, so we were like between 10 and 15 FPS when all of those engines were firing. But look at it, isn't it wonderful? This reminds me of the early days of Kerbal Space Program, where you could just slap boosters to everything to make things better. No aerodynamic drag or anything to slow you down, no atmospheric heating to explode your tanks if they have a flat surface instead of a nose cone or something. But yeah, 5 minutes for staging one Rocket is a bit for long for me to enjoy this actually. But hey, this is very early days, and just within the span of a week there were already significant improvements to the editor. The developers themselves say that the editor enables them to push the boundaries of what's possible, and that will lead to better performance over time, because now they can go really bonkers compared to earlier when the vehicle editor was really limited or not existing at all. So expect more good things to come out of this very soon. At least I do. Since I basically had to redo this video compared to what I planned originally, I was not able to release an early access version for my people on Patreon and my YouTube members, so very much sorry about that. But if you enjoy what I do here on this platform, maybe consider visiting those places like the YouTube member page or my Patreon site, where you can support what I do for a small monthly contribution, or buy a single-time super thanks on YouTube, or by buying one of my content over on Patreon with a small single fee. Patreon members get access to all of my videos ad-free, and on the higher tiers, your name will show up here, together with all of these wonderful people. Thank you so much for your support. And a big thank you to the developers of Kitten Space Agency over at Studio Rocketworks for keeping at it and making everything in this game better every week. It's really exciting to follow the progress along here and see where it takes us. And if this kind of whet your appetite, you can get KSA for free over on ksa.awu.com. And no, nobody paid me to say this, I really just want this game to succeed, so go and grab it and maybe leave a small contribution for the developers there, because as I said, the game is for free, but the people still need to eat, right? For me, it's back to the shed. Let's see what other weird contraptions I can come up with. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel for more and follow me on my social thingies. The links are in the description. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.